Hi, Scorpio. This is Tisch Aitken, and this is your monthly horoscope for the month of July. And we are in the middle of eclipse season, and there's a lot of energy in the sky and a lot of change in a very short period of time. And there are also several planets retrograde. The only planets that are not retrograde at the moment are Mars and Uranus. And although there is a huge shift with Mars, but I'll get to that in a moment. So yes, so we had a lunar eclipse on June 5th that occurred at 15 degrees of Sagittarius, and that fell in the 12th house of the subconscious mind and the house of dreams and imagination, and that could be very creative. It could bring some information to light because the 12th house could be hidden secrets and certainly could bring information through dreams, perhaps closure through dreams or connecting with people that perhaps have passed over. And it's a very, very creative cycle too, in the sense that it does rule the imagination. So that was one eclipse. And then the second eclipse that occurred, that was a big deal, was a total solar eclipse that occurred on June 21st at 0 degrees of Cancer. Fell in your ninth house of higher education and learning and publicity and promotion. And this eclipse is really huge. It was the last eclipse in the sign of Cancer. We've had eclipses in the Cancer Capricorn axis for a few years now. And the nodes of fate just exited Cancer and Capricorn on May 5th and entered the Gemini Sagittarius axis. So now there's a lot more around learning and sharing information and teaching and publicity and marketing and education of all forms, and also around local community too. But this eclipse in Cancer, that invokes new beginnings at 0 degrees of the sign, and solar eclipses tend to be more about new beginnings and definitely about planting new seeds, because it's a new moon within a total solar eclipse has to be a new moon within 9 degrees of the node of the moon. And in this case, it was only within 1 degree of the north node of destiny. So the north node is where we want to go towards. So there's a lot for you around teaching and learning and going back to school and taking classes. And there's going to be a second new moon in that house that occurs on June 20th at 28 degrees of Cancer. So the moon is going to be in the sign it rules. And it's not going to be as intense as a total solar eclipse, because nothing can be, especially when the moon or the sun is in the sign it rules. And in the case of the total solar eclipse in June, the moon was in the sign of Cancer, which it rules. So that's a lot of new beginnings around that sector for you. And also Mercury is retrograding in that area, and it's stationed retrograde on June 18th at 14 degrees of Cancer, and it stations direct on July 12th. So we've got it for the first half of the month. And it can bring distant memories from the past and people you went to school with, perhaps reconnecting with people from college or from other sectors of your life, or through traveling, through just hearing from somebody from your past, and also just really distant childhood memories. And again, around reflecting and reviewing what you want to learn, because there's so much around education, especially with the nodes of fate transiting in Gemini and Sagittarius. So the North Node is what we're meant to go towards, and it's transiting in Gemini until January of 2022. And it's transiting in your 8th house of transformation and doing healing work and renewal. It's also the house of joint resources and investment and money. And so that's where it's the Scorpio house in solar astrology, but that's where North Node is, and that's where Venus was retrograde. And Venus retrogrades once every 18 months, and it's stationed retrograde on May 13th at 21 degrees of Gemini, and it's stationed direct on June 25th at 5 degrees of Gemini. And that happens every 8 years in that sector of your chart. And that's also, again, a big review around your investments, your joint resources, debt, mortgages, taxes, but also healing and intimacy and renewal, and could be love affairs, very passionate romances or love affairs, soulmates, that kind of thing. But that Venus is transiting in that house until August 8th. So it's, now it's direct, but it hasn't cleared its shadow yet. And the North Node of Fate is going to be there for quite a while. So that's a big emphasis. And we have a Jupiter-Neptune sextile, and that occurs on July 27th. And that's an aspect of opportunity. And that occurs in your Jupiter's transiting in your house of communication, and that's where all the planets in Capricorn. This year has been the Capricorn year, in the sense that we had more Capricorn that we'll see again in our lifetime, and we had Saturn and Pluto, which meet up every 34 to 36 years, meet up at the world axis on January 12th at 22 degrees of Capricorn, and that fell in your house of the mind and communication and ideas, and again, teaching, could be getting much more involved in local community affairs and around sales or marketing and those type of things. And so it's a very intense time, and as much change as it is, and it's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of things with corporations with the next eclipse being in Capricorn, perhaps unfortunately layoffs or changes and people getting new jobs and making changes, but also reassessing how you want to get goals accomplished, because this is a very difficult year, but it's a year where we can get a lot accomplished if we really commit with integrity to our goals and with hard work and dedication, because Capricorn is about coming from a place of integrity, setting boundaries in a kind but respectful but firm way, because that's really the way to, Capricorn's good at setting boundaries, and I think it's necessary for success, and yet also really connecting to the collective, because Saturn briefly entered the sign of Aquarius on March 23rd, and it exits Aquarius on July 1st, in the beginning of the month, and it will re-enter Aquarius on December 17th, and it'll be there until March of 2023. And so, that's where we're connecting much more to community, to helping others, to the collective, to seeking enlightenment. And that's a big deal. And thinking in alternative ways, and thinking more in groups rather than focusing on self. So I think the era of selfies will definitely be done, and in that kind of emphasis when Saturn re-enters Aquarius. And, I think it's a big deal around forming connection through communication, and that's our resource, and our currency is our intellect and our learning and communication, and that I think is being directed in many different ways in the cosmos. But we're not done yet with the Capricorn tail. And the last thing I'll say is that Mars is transiting in Aries, and that's a big deal because it's going to be in Aries until January 3rd, and it entered on June 27th, and it entered the world point at 0 degrees of Aries, 0 cardinal, and set off that total solar eclipse. So we're going to feel a lot of heavy energy in the beginning of July, and that energy from the eclipse is going to loom for a while because it was such a heavy and powerful eclipse. And Mars is going to set off that Saturn-Pluto conjunction 3 times, because it's going to retrograde in the fall from September 9th until November 13th. And so it's going to be August 11th, October 7th, and December 19th. And so those are the time frames that a lot of stuff is going to happen. It could be friction. It could be getting a lot accomplished, but it might be a lot of, bringing more light to what's happened since the beginning of the year. So, and Mars retrograde is going to be challenging because it does not like being held back in Aries. It's such a fiery sign that wants to charge full force ahead. So you really want to be cautious in how you use that energy, but it's excellent for getting things accomplished, particularly in July and August, because that's when it's going to be in its rulership and direct. So you ideally do not want to launch something when it's retrograde. You want to maybe plan it now and set the stages if there is something you need to launch in the fall. And I wish you a lot of luck, and thank you very much. All right, take care.